Salutations, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland, and in this video, I'm going to pose the question, should we be proud of where we're from? Because it's often taken as an axiom that people should necessarily be proud of where you're from. Be proud of where you're from. Don't forget where you come from. Just automatically think it's a good thing, want people to know where we come from, and talk it up. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but we should question everything. So origin is a lottery. I'm talking about geographical origin here mainly, but that's also true with where you come on the socioeconomic scale, who your parents are, your personality type, which faith you're brought up in, if any, gender, I can't think what else, sexual orientation, your parents' political outlook, and your ethnicity and blah, blah, blah. Now, ethnicity and geographical origin are often linked. Not always, and less so, as there's more and more migration around the world. So there's a hierarchy of identity. You can start from your locality, the very smallest level, your municipality, work right up to being part of the human race. So I'll do mine from micro to macro. I'm from Cork City, in County Cork. I'm from the province of Munster. I'm from the Republic of Ireland, from the British Isles as a whole. I also identify with the United Kingdom. I'm from Western Europe. I'm from the European Union. I'm from the continent of Europe. I'm from the West, which is vaguely defined yet comprehensible. I'm from planet Earth, and on and on and on. So that's it at various levels. What's fascinating is the salience of these different levels of geographic identity, what matters to you more than most. For example, being from Cork City and County matters to me somewhat. Being from Munster, not very much. It's scintillating away in Ireland, that doesn't matter. Counties really count. That's partly because of the Gaelic Athletic Association, the GAA. If you're not Irish, you won't know this. We have our own sports, Gaelic football and hurling, and we compete on a county basis, which is why counties matter very much in Ireland, less so in England or so many other countries. And provinces weren't always as they are. Clare, as part of Munster, used to be part of Connacht. Louth is part of Leinster. Formerly, it was an Ulster county, and on and on. The counties have sometimes changed names, but very little, much less so than in Great Britain. So being part of Western Europe, obviously, how far west does that go? Berlin would have been Eastern Europe till 1989, and is there Central Europe? So these boundaries, they are in flux. They're not strictly defined, like so many things. It's fascinating the emotional attachment these things will have, despite being unclear, despite being actually temporary and often quite new. And people often don't realise just how new and just how flexible these things are. Now, being from the Republic of Ireland matters to me quite a lot. What matters to me most actually is being from the British Isles. I identify with Ireland and our kith and kin in Great Britain, citizen of the UK as well. Western Europe doesn't matter to me that much. The European Union, scarcely at all. The continent of Europe, not very much. The West, again, somewhat. The world, well, the human race, I suppose, quite a lot. I'm definitely not another species. So that's it. But for other people being from Ireland, the whole of Ireland will really matter, and the British Isles not at all, and so on. So each individual may have a different level of saliency, whether they attach to a different geographical level. You see, there's like a Venn diagram, bags inside bags inside bags of identity, sometimes overlapping bags. So we could say, talk about the Commonwealth of Nations, which overlaps with the European Union, which overlaps with the Council of Europe and blah, 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 which overlaps with NATO. So that's the way it goes. There's this hierarchy of identity. So why would people be proud of where they're from? Well, all sorts of things. Just could be the place in the most literal sense. They like it physically. The land, could be the soil and the rocks even. Often it's the flora, the trees. We know our national plant, well, shamrock, for example. In America, they've got state flowers and things like that. The Welsh have got a leek because of the Battle of Crecy, where the Welshmen fought in a leek garden. The Scots have got the thistle from that battle of, I can't remember, it was against the Norwegians, the Battle of Largs, stepping on a thistle. There's some misconceptions of battle against the English. The English got a rose, which used to be only for Lancashire, and it's fascinating the way a symbol of just one locality can then apply to the whole place. Like green, the flag of Leinster, Green wasn't considered the Irish colour till about 1800, or Thomas More composed poem The Emerald Isle, or the United Irishmen carrying green flags. St Patrick's blue, that's really our colour. That's why we have trees on flags, or the cedars of Lebanon, or that branch, that olive branch of Cyprus. Mountains, the highest mountain, you might identify that as the sacred mountain in Korea, Gateku, or Mount Everest in Nepal might matter to you, or the fact that your landscape, your country is mostly desert, or mostly steppe, or forests, or whatever, or by the sea, or a set of islands. In fact, we're an island. In Ireland, that matters a lot. The English say that they're a seafaring people. Fields, desert, rivers, lakes, countries like Gambia take their name from this geographical feature. The 40 shades of green in Ireland, or even the climate, as we often quip, Ireland's got 40 shades of grey, not the erotic novel. I don't mean anything salacious. I mean the fact it's very cloudy and rains very heavily. To paraphrase Billy Connolly, in Ireland our two seasons are winter and June. Or I often say that in Ireland summer is the best week of the year. So verdure, that can matter to people, just the colour scheme of the country. But I often get it on flags, how the way it's just so exceptionally lush in Ireland. We luxuriate in greenery. The hills we have, plenty of drumlins, particularly in the northeast. So climate, animals, symbols like horses, we're a very equestrian people. Dogs, particular dogs like Irish wolfhounds. Other countries identify their camels, their horses, or whatever. I shan't go on. So what makes a people is difficult to say. For some people it's ethnicity, not for me, though. Not saying that ethnicity doesn't matter whatsoever. It's sort of like saying your family doesn't matter. And the language, but our language is not exclusive. Even the Irish language, which we scarcely speak, has something in common with other Celtic peoples. Faith could be, or religion could be a religious denomination. There are obviously subdivisions within that. But then if you're a secular society, that's a bit tricky. What's culture, what's religion? Again, there's no obvious dividing line. So what is culture? What does that consist of? It can be your cuisine, for instance, which again would be exclusive. You're borrowed of other things. Look at Scotland. The way haggis is actually a Greek thing. I remember telling that to a young Scotsman when I was a schoolboy myself, and it was saying absolute bull. He couldn't accept it because it was so deeply ingrained in him that this was an originally and exclusively Scots thing. He found it deeply upsetting to realise it wasn't completely North British. It was an invented tradition, like kilts. When I say invented, everything's invented. It's got to start sometime. What do you mean by invented? How new does it have to be invented? So, of course, we borrow from other cultures. A bit like it's faintly amusing to see St. Patrick's Day parades in the United States where they're not wearing Irish kilts. They're not wearing Irish hats or playing Irish pipes. It's all Scottish stuff, but they got very blurred. So people have no objection to mingling the two. How about we wear things that are distinctively English to celebrate us being Irish? Oh no, oh my goodness, that would be unthinkable. The horror, perish the thought that we have anything in common with our kith and kin. So codes of manners are different. We shake hands in different parts of the world. As opposed to namaste, men and women can shake hands, kissing on the cheek in France. What's acceptable, what's unacceptable. Little superstitions. In Russia, not shaking hands across the door frame, offering bread and salt as a sign of hospitality and blah, blah, blah. Asking how are you is not a big thing in Russia for people you don't know. The man in the moon, I assume that was universal. It's not. In Romania and in Russia, for example, they've got no story of a man in the moon. It was a revelation for me. Clothes, what we wear, national dress, Irish kilts, we almost never wear those, as opposed to, let's say, saris in India or shalwar kameez in Pakistan. So your fashion can be like that. Obviously, we have an increasingly globalized world, and in China they don't wear traditional Chinese dress, almost never, and so forth. So music, obviously famous composers, melodies, tunes, everybody knows that one. Instruments like the bowron in Ireland, a tin whistle, dancing. There's a particular type of Irish dancing, but I can't do it. Most Irish people can't do it. Just like, martial arts, asking a Japanese, are you big into karate? No, there's a misconception. Most people don't do it, even though it is a Japanese thing. No dancing at all if you're from an Islamic fundamentalist country. So our law, our vision poems, are also our plastic arts. Different types of painting, styles of sculpture. And the fascinating thing is how cultures cross-fertilize, right? Our culture is not hermetically sealed. We transmit memes, we receive memes. So there is no cordon sanitaire to prevent anything coming in. And that's why I find it so distasteful saying we can't possibly borrow that because we're a separate culture. We don't want to be influenced or polluted by them. We might dilute our culture, but we should accept that cultures, they always have a dialogue, have intercourse, not to be too crude. So that's why I don't really object to Americans getting it slightly wrong and wearing Scots stuff where they're trying to underscore the fact they have Irish stock. So we could look at our literature, our novels, our poesy, and so on. Folk tales, which were eventually written down, or an oral storytelling tradition, even now telling them out loud. Sense of humour, what's acceptable in terms of mirth, well-known standard jokes. It's fascinating to know the Englishman, the Irishman, the Scotsman. There's an Eastern European version of that, which I shan't go into. So nursery rhymes, festivals, and it was enthralling in Romania to learn some of their nursery rhymes. Like the English often identify with Shakespeare, even if they've never read him. Sports, I already mentioned the GAA, saying that's part of our collective individuality, even if we never play those games. Cheering on your team, and that's how nationalism, the nation state, really emerged around about 1900, partly international sport, identifying it where often a provincial identity mattered more prior to that. Let's say bullfighting in Spain, something that's originally Spanish and has spread to the rest of the Hispanic world to a lesser extent. Various festivals like the running of the bulls, that matters. Things like the Puck Fair in Ireland, in Kilorglin. Various myths, the ancient Greeks, they don't believe in that pantheon, but their mythology still matters to them very deeply. They invested a lot of their identity in that. Egyptian Muslims, some of them, still very proud of the pharaohs, of the pyramids and so forth, despite completely disbelieving in that credo. So heroes, both real and imagined, living, often dead. Well, wars they fought in, war memorials, institutions like the army and so on. All these things go up to make a culture and an identity. Also villains, who are the anti-heroes. In Ireland we say it stinks like Cromwell. Anyway, food, well, not just what you eat, how you eat it. Hands, knives and forks. And what sort of knives and forks? Special spoons. Which one do you eat first? Salad before or afterwards? Afterwards in France. Times of day you eat. Some people eating by hand and so on. I noticed Russians putting like slices of bread or meat in a circle. I thought it was fascinating. I'd never seen that before, but that was just the obvious way for them to do it. Architecture, and on and on. I could go on all day, but all these things contribute to making a culture. Little superstitions like black cats, good luck or bad luck. They're good luck in Ireland and Great Britain. Did you open your Christmas presents on Christmas Eve like the Germans, or Christmas Day like the rest of us? And then look at Jewish people for centuries were a nation, in a sense, without a land. I mean, I know they had an ancestral homeland, but for centuries there's no thought of going back there. Next year in Jerusalem, but they didn't actually expect it to happen. They didn't try and make it happen until the late 19th century, not in a concerted way, making Aliyah. Even then they said, could we go to Uganda? And some Jewish people, they say, we're not a nation, we're a faith, even now. So you can have disembodied nations or arguably nations like gypsies who don't identify with a particular part of the world, who are scattered. So, and obviously many nations like the Irish, or whatever a nation is, we have a diaspora as well, our people dispersed around the globe. Most people in Ireland wouldn't like to acknowledge this, but to some extent we are the English diaspora, and the Scots and the Welsh diaspora, or the Danish. We have a little bit of, say, French or German stock, blah, blah, blah. Some of our ancestors came from Spain, which wasn't Spain at the time, tracing right back to Kazakhstan, Scythia. It was fascinating to learn that when I was in Kazakhstan. In a sense, I'd gone the full circle. I know I'd really have to go to the Rift Valley in East Africa to go back to where man began. So these are arbitrary categories, nations and places. It's almost like saying people born on Thursday. They're, birds of a feather should stick together. We have characteristics. I can't remember which psychological fallacy this is, but people simply assuming that they can categorize people, that they have similar traits. I remember Richard Dawkins saying this when he was at Oundle School in the 50s. There was this idea going around that boys in a particular house, they all had a house character. And he said there was almost no truth in that, but we really extrapolated from a few dominant characters onto the rest of them, that they all behave like this. And that's just not the case. I suppose we want to rationalize things. We want to put people in boxes or things in boxes to make it simple, to make it understandable so we can cope with it. And it's much more difficult to accept really there's just chaos. It's just disordered. It's not tidy. Same people try and do so with history or lots of other theorizing, that really the big idea that there is no big idea, that it can't be easily sorted out. It's a mess. Or the blood group, whether you're, O positive, A B, B, that determines your character, and you're all alike, which of course would be drivel, or if you're left-handed or right-handed, that really says a lot about your character. Or they've done this one in the psychological experiments with blue eyes and brown eyes. The fascinating thing is it's whites, some are blue, some are brown, some are green, that would mean everything about your personality, your behavior. And of course, if you treat people like that, they might actually start to behave the way you said that they should behave, labeling, because they've been conditioned. So there's lots of migration has gone on. I remember the Nazis used to talk about the migration of the peoples, as though it's happened once. Of course, it's always going on, always has gone on, always shall go on. Now, it can happen more, it can happen less. Over the past few decades, it's sped up and been much more radical, going much further, because jet travel is affordable. We no longer have to walk. That's why, moving out of Africa 3 million years ago, moved very, very, very slowly. And that's why some parts of the world, the American continent, wasn't inhabited till perhaps 20,000 years ago. So it took almost 3 million years for people to get from, let's say, Uganda to, Mexico. So you can work out the rate of kilometers per year they were moved. So we're all related somewhere along the line. There's that film 6 Degrees of Separation, and we all know each other via intermediaries somewhere along the line. So we're more in common than many racists would like to acknowledge. So, but if my land is poor, should I be proud or ashamed or indifferent or what? Should I assume that where I come from, at any level, my village, right up to planet Earth, is good? Or, in between, my county, my province, my country, my archipelago is desirable, is the best or the worst, or somewhere in between? Can I go by objective criteria? It's so difficult because people invest so much emotion in this, and then they opine that their place is fantastic. So I can accept that where I'm from, at any level, from my city, from my parish, right up to planet Earth, is anywhere on the scale, from absolutely outstanding to absolutely dreadful. Now, there's only one planet Earth, so I suppose planet Earth is everything. It's the best and the worst planet Earth because it's the only one. The wonderful thing about Tiggers is I'm the only one. So some people from where I come from are cruel, are kind. Now, it could be that more of them are cruel or more of them are kind than in most places. I don't know. But I'm not obliged to assume that we're unusually good or even averagely good or even averagely bad. Obviously, there's a my side bias. Most people are prejudiced to think that our lot is good. What if you come from a place where honor killings are common? That just a woman could be killed for almost anything. Like, it's in northwest frontier of Pakistan, or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. A man might say, we're not violent. I'd only kill you if you did something totally outrageous, such as you spoke to my wife. A woman pregnant outside marriage could easily be killed. I am not exaggerating. If she refuses to marry the man her parents wanted to, easily be put to death. It's murder, but they always get away with it. What if there's a lot of racism in your society? People are gallant who stand out against that, who say no, like, say, whites in the southern part of the United States who spoke up against racism. No, I'm not propagating white savior myths. There were a few white saviors, and obviously there are many courageous black people, as black people did most of the heavy lifting in terms of achieving equality in the United States. So I'm not obliged to think that most people in my community are good or to share their attitudes, okay? They could be right, they could be wrong, and it's very difficult to be neutral because I might be so keen to show that I'm independent-minded and not prejudiced with all my own people, I could lean the other way and be prejudiced against them. It's very hard to judge. Whatever you do, you're going to be accused of something. You could be accused of being too inclined towards your people or indeed inclined against your people. Aren't you going to stick by your own people? It's often said. You're a race traitor. Traitor is the foulest insult to be branded with. But actually, you should wear it like a badge of honor sometimes. It's like a medal to go against your people when they're wrong. But your people at what level? Your parish, your county, your province? Like, take the Irish conflict in the 1920s. Some Irishmen, indeed Catholic Irishmen from the south, would fight for the United Kingdom, not just Ireland, the whole of the United Kingdom, despite the fact that most people in Ireland, or most people in their province, or in their county, or in their parish, were against the United Kingdom, didn't want to be the United Kingdom, but these men would have a loyalty to the larger entity. Or take the US Civil War, when some white Southerners would be loyal to the United States even so, that their loyalty to the United States trumped their loyalty to their state. That was the entity that mattered most to them, that level. That was in the hierarchy of identity. The United States, the country as a whole, mattered more than the state. And what is a nation? There's no decent definition. There's no universally accepted one. It was scintillating to read when the Civil War began how the southern states, when they seceded from the United States, declared that they'd become nations again. Anyway, nobody would say that they're nations now. So there's a lot of crime. Well, mostly we're victims of crime, not perpetrators of crime, but certain crimes might be tolerated, like smuggling, or let's say in Colombia. A lot of people say, well, drugs, come on, we're only selling it to rich Americans, we're not forcing them to buy it. So that's that, it's acceptable. Whereas obviously the UK used to be a major drug dealing nation in the 19th century, was considered innocent and even honourable to do that, making fortunes out of it. So tolerating gun violence in the United States, should you be proud, ashamed, or what? Now, but then again, I'm not obliged to be ashamed of people from my place who do bad things. I mean, shame is a negative emotion, pride's a more positive one, because it's much more tempting to go in for this alluring emotion which reflects well on me. But it takes a lot of moral courage, sometimes physical courage, to say no. A lot of people where I come from are bad and I don't like it. I don't have to like the landscape or the cooking or the whatever or the music. I'll go into my likes and my dislikes about Ireland. I mean, I mostly like our cuisine. I suppose I quite like our whiskey. I don't like our beer that much, well, it's just so fattening. We don't produce wine, unfortunately. We've got the Irish-owned vineyards in France, like Barton and so on, that's good. I like some of our folk music and blah, 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 but I'm not obliged to like any of it, or indeed all of it, or I could like absolutely everything about it. I'm not obliged to loathe it either. So try to be indifferent. It's difficult because, you're told you should like this from a very tender age, and little children are impressionable. So if bad things are legalized, that's obviously wrong. Some countries where there's no law against marital rape, obviously that's bad, you should be against that. You don't have to be ashamed of your country against that particular policy. Semi-slavery exists in many Middle Eastern countries, and obviously you should campaign against that. But you don't have to simply accept things because this is the way we do it. I remember an official in Azerbaijan saying, don't criticize it because it's our rules. Now, I'm big enough to take it. Hey, criticize my country. Come on. I'll agree with you sometimes, other times not. But don't hold back. I'm not obliged to believe that Ireland, or that the British Isles, is the best, or even averagely good. The things I dislike about it. Some people are a bit too touchy. They can't take an outsider saying it about their country, about their ethnicity, about their religion, even though they will say that inside the family. So should pornography be allowed? Is this something which is to be proud of, ashamed of, or indifferent to? I think we should be proud to be a free society, tolerating this. Prostitution allowed? I think that was a mature society, a wise one, a decent, civilized one like Switzerland or Germany. And obviously it's illegal in the UAE, but it's a huge entrepot for prostitution. Should drugs be allowed or not? Should we be ashamed if they're allowed? Should we be proud? These things are endlessly debatable. So people are very emotional, and I can get engulfed by pride myself. When I saw Ireland playing rugby the other night, we're going forward with the ball, about to score. But it'd be a bit inhuman to ask us to be without sentimentality. Even when I hear the word England, in my mind I'm chanting Ireland, 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 because that's the trouble. Even someone as broad-minded as me, as Anglophile as me, has got this idea we have to define ourselves in contradistinction to our neighbours, the English and the mainland British in particular. So as though the 12 kilometres of sea between Ireland and Scotland make all the difference in the world. But you get a bit of that in England as well, Little Englanders, and that 30 kilometres between the White Cliffs of Dover and Cap Gris-Nez makes all the difference in the world. Well, often it did. Napoleon saying, give me the Straits of Dover for 6 hours, and I will give you the world. As in, then he could conquer Great Britain and France would dominate everything. So there's a visceral sense of belonging to a place and to a people. And it's not a bad thing. I mean, patriotism at a reasonable level can be healthy. I care about the people I help, doing things for them. It's like your family, like a very, very extended family. And when I hear certain melodies, that makes me happy, sorrowful. It makes me sentimental. It touches a nerve. I feel my scalp moving. I feel Irish pride. So that doesn't oblige me to support policies or to dislike people or to oppose policies. So it's very difficult to separate the rational from the emotional. And the rational and the emotional, they're not necessarily in conflict. They could go together. There's this old saying that the devil has all the best tunes. And so because we associate it with things which have such an emotional appeal on people, the sight of the flag, the national anthem, things that can reduce a strong man to tears, that's why ultra-nationalists can channel reasonable people into doing dreadful things, into fighting when they shouldn't, into excusing atrocities. Remember when I was abroad and NATO countries were bombing Yugoslavia and some of the Indians giving me a hard time out on the train? And I actually did fully agree with saving the Kosovo Albanians from being massacred, which certain governments were denying was happening. Nobody disputes it now. Saying, what are they doing? They're bombing the hospital. I said, that must be a mistake. Well, I don't know for certain it was a mistake. I certainly hope it was a mistake. I wouldn't defend that kind of thing. But I felt a little bit insulted. People feel hurt, they hit back. And because there is so much feeling involved in these things, you really can hit a raw nerve. There are certain sacred cows people have. This is our totem, you mustn't insult that one. And there's certain taboos, you can't admit that that thing was done bad by people of my nationality. Or you can't question that national myth, because then we just be incensed. And then your feeling is running very high. It's very hard to assess these things objectively. Looking at Cromwell's massacre at Drogheda, if we point out that was par for the course at the time, or similar things to be done earlier by Catholic Irish people against English Protestants in Ireland, which obviously doesn't make it right. It's still an abominable crime to slaughter civilians in Drogheda. But the people in Drogheda were actually English, mostly. And that kind of upsets people. They want the victims to be Irish, and on and on. There is this scintillating book you must read by the Anderson brothers. I think I'll have to tell you more about it in another video because it's getting too long. Imagine communities, saying that nations don't really exist. Nobody can say what they really are, can demarcate them in land, in time, when they start, when they finish, when they break up. Because why should the border be here and not a centimetre this way or that way? There's no logical reason, in a sense, and the borders are forever changing, and all the rest of it. And immigrants are coming in and emigrants are going out, so that they don't really exist. They exist in the mind. They're a nonsense. They're a distraction from the class struggle. This was a Marxist guy, Anderson. He's no longer with us. So they say a prophet is always rejected in his own town. So let's say, take about Irish nationalism, or indeed republicanism. Pádraig Pearse, in 1916, nobody would have imagined that in 5 years the major portion of Ireland would have left the UK. Who would have thought that 33 years later it would have been a republic? And yet it happened. 1948, the State of Israel was born. 50 years earlier, it seemed just completely for the birds. Pakistan, an impossible dream, as its father, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, said. And on and on. And nations that once exist are now forgotten. Nobody's even heard of them. You know, who knows about the Holy Roman Empire, if indeed it was a nation, or, you know, Brittany as a nation, or Cornwall as a nation, as an independent nation state, and all the rest of it. So, no to solidarity. National solidarity can be a pernicious thing. I'll support someone from my group, even if he did something bad. Someone from the other group is bad, even if he did something good. And it's a bit like, who was it, E.M. Forster said, if you've got to choose between betraying your friends and betraying your country, I'd hope I'd have the guts to betray my country. You might be called an Uncle Tom, somebody who will take the side of the others against his own people, a race traitor. But now that's a bit different because he's a slave. I know he's got tremendous forbearance. He's forgiving of those people who abuse him when he shouldn't. Or there's Stockholm Syndrome. People abuse you, or like abuse a child, or keep you hostage or something, and then you take the side of them and think that you deserve it. Victim blaming, self-loathing. So I realise it can be bad like that. Or, people saying you've got a cultural cringe, you've got a slave mentality, just because someone is objective, is broad-minded, and is sagacious enough, is brave enough to reject blinkered nationalism. So nationalism, it can be irrational, pernicious, unfair, any nationalism, if it goes too far. It can be mindless, it can be chauvinistic, it can be murderous. But up to a reasonable level, it can be a good thing, especially if it's not grounded on hostility towards the other, on othering different people, indigenous minorities, or indeed immigrant minorities. So if there's to be nationalism at all, I don't think it's an entirely bad thing. It should be an open, welcoming one, embracing new people and absorbing them, not asking them to completely shed their old culture, to learn from that, the positive aspects of it, and not to mindlessly think that one's own culture is always superior and we can never absorb anything else. You know, the UK, we could never have Indian restaurants, or British Indian women could never wear their traditional clothing. I mean, I completely accept that. Likewise, in the Republic of Ireland, we've got Chinese restaurants, that's fine, not asking them not to. We have Sikh Irishmen wearing turbans. No skin off my nose. Fine, do it. So borders are, of course, they're artificial. They're all man-made. We often hear this in Ireland. Oh, they're artificial. I know often borders go by geographical features. Well, the border in Ireland does slightly because the county boundaries do along, hill crests, lakes and rivers and so on. So borders, at the moment, we can't function without them. We could get to a situation where there's one world government. So should we be proud of where we're from? I mean, up to a point, if it's something completely harmless by the landscape and so on. But what I'm just saying is we shouldn't have a closed-minded and a hostile sort of pride, which is about denigrating others.